All right, welcome back, folks. We are here again looking at the tropics tonight. This is part two of our evening video on Fiona and Invest 98L. I'm breaking these videos up now into two different sections. The first one's a quick 5-minute video. I understand a lot of people, they don't want to sit through the long stuff. So that video is up on the page and on YouTube for you guys to check out. That's a lot more digestible, shareable, what you will. But this one's going to be more of our normal style, talking through all the weather stuff that goes along with these storms. A little bit more relaxed, just kind of poking through the latest. We'll go through the models and all that stuff. So if that's what you're looking for, you're in the right place. And if it's not, well, the other video is probably exactly what you need. So still tracking Fiona and Invest 98L. Fiona is a really impressive hurricane tonight. This storm Philip Klotzbach shared this earlier on Twitter. It is the most powerful hurricane we've seen at 932 millibars or so as a current central pressure, north of 32 or 30 degrees north ever in this part of the basin, or in a long time at least. It's been a while if we haven't had one this strong. It's been a hot minute. This is a really powerful hurricane. And you can see here on the infrared satellite, there's a cold front quickly moving through the U.S. tonight, and this is all part of the trough that's coming down to pick up Fiona. And you're going to have this trough swing in and then pivot the storm up into eastern Canada, where it's just an exceptionally powerful storm is forecast. Close-up view of Fiona, though, before we get to that point. Pretty much steady state tonight. You're seeing those pulses of deeper convection rotating around that eye, but the pulses kind of move, and you see the eye wall or the central dense overcast where there is kind of breaking down in a few spots, so the lighter colors indicating that the shear there's still some amount of shear on the storm, and it's been pretty steady state. So I think the offsetting is the water temperatures are still warm enough and the wind shear isn't that strong. So Fiona has pretty much held in intensity for the last 24-30 hours or so. She could be coming down a little bit more tonight. I think you're seeing the storm continue to expand its wind field, and when they do that, the winds typically lower. It's Imagine if you saw a figure skater and they pull their arms in really tight, they would get really fast, but they wouldn't have much influence. Where if they spread their arms out really wide, then you have, more influence, but you have a less, of a speed. It's kind of what the physics do. And as they move north, they like to expand their wind fields. And especially when they undergo extratropical transition, they really begin to expand their wind fields. And that's what Fiona is doing right now. The evening Hurricane Hunter flights, which are going to fly until this gets to Canada, which is pretty cool. Good research here, indicating that the surface winds are probably closer to 115 miles an hour, 120 miles an hour. Hurricane Center probably drops this to 125 or 120 at the next advisory, put it back into category 3. But it is a still an impressive storm. Look at the wind field range, because this is something people don't talk about enough. Is Yeah, just because the storm isn't producing as much max winds, if the wind field is double in size, that's a hell of an impact. That affects waves, that affects surge, that affects how many people get the strong winds, because there's always this duality of people underestimate how bad, say, an 80-mile-an-hour wind is, but then when the storm only produces 80-mile-an-hour winds, but it produces it over a very large swath of the population, oh my God, that storm was so bad. What happened? Well, it's because instead of getting one narrow band of 110-mile-an-hour winds and 40 everywhere else, if you just put 80 everywhere, it's a lot more damage. So that's something we have to be, cognizant of. This is the evening look from Colorado State's products, and they're showing the radius of 34 knot winds, which is tropical storm force, goes out to 160 miles from the center of the storm. That is huge. I mean, northeast and southwest. That means the storm encompasses, what is that, 320 miles, right, of range north to south. I mean, if that hit Central Florida, if this moved in right into Central Florida, that means pretty much everyone up and down the coast of Florida would probably get a tropical storm at least, that's really impressive. And the radius of hurricane force winds, 64 knots, those are now extending upwards of 50 to 100 miles from the center. So really, really, really impressive as far as that goes. But again, as we've talked about on the other video, the landfall potential for the storm is crazy. The H-Wharf evening run has got this at 914 millibars at landfall, which is Category 5 hurricane intensity and then some. The caveat is the H-Wharf initialized this at 917, so I don't think it's really accurate. But even if you add back the initialization error from 917 to 930, I mean, if you put this even up in the upper 920s, it's still a historic storm. And by this point, you're undergoing that extratropical transition. So the storm is even larger in size at this point. I mean, there's wave forecasts that are like 50, 60 plus feet just offshore. I mean, this is going to be so destructive for Eastern Canada, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia. I mean, it's going to be really bad. I kind of harped on the other video. Again, GFS also shows this coming in at 931 millibars. That's just crazy. I mean, this is probably going to be a generational storm for these folks up here. I mean, every preparation needs to be made tonight because this is going to be a whale of a storm. And I stress, like I told y'all yesterday, I think I maybe mentioned it in the comments. If this trough was 24 hours behind schedule and it was just now swinging into the U.S., this would be getting pulled into New England, and New England would have a storm like we've never probably seen before. So count your lucky stars. This is going further north than us, although obviously no, we don't want to see anybody get it. This could have been just as bad for us as it's going to be for Canada, more or less. All right, I want to go over to Invest 98L tonight. Our storm is getting a little bit better organized. I'm not going to say it's really great yet, but it's definitely got a more coherent vortex to it. It looks like you have at least a very weak low-level center. We can see the spinach right here just north of South America, kind of this little bay here. And it looks like in the low-level cloud pattern, you've got at least either a very sharp wave axis, or you potentially got a closed low on the surface. But that does not mean it's got enough support to become a tropical storm yet. But having a coherent vortex is important. So those are the two things we're looking for in the short term: is how much latitude it gains in the short term, and how fast that wind shear from Fiona abates. So as we were talking about the last couple of days. Fiona, I don't have this broken up here, but Fiona's upper level outflow is moving down clockwise like this, and Fiona's upper level winds are exhausting on top of the storm. So in the upper levels, 98L has got Fiona taking a dump on it from way up here, which has caused the storm to stay weak, and it's why it hasn't formed yet, or at least one of the reasons. So there's some satellite clues that is changing. You see water vapor imagery shows that the storm, the clouds in the upper levels are starting to flatten out ahead of the storm. So again, our low level center is somewhere right here. A little bit of thunderstorm activity blowing off to the southwest because in this section, the winds out of the northeast are still pretty strong. But however, if you look over here out ahead, you can see an upper high is starting to build over this region. You can see the more diffuse cloud pattern here. These clouds are slowing down and they're kind of taking more of a westerly shift, and they're kind of slowing down in general. And this is where the storm is currently moving towards. Now, you're wondering maybe, why is the storm moving to the north if all these strong winds are blowing it to the south? Well, it's because these winds are in the upper levels of the atmosphere. Weather happens in 3D. These winds, rather, are coming out of the northeast at a very high level. They're upward 15, 20, 25,000 feet. So there's actually two components to the storm, the low level and the high level. So in the low level, I'll show you this here. So if you kind of watch this little spinny rotation right here, focus on this specific part of the cloud pattern for a second. So you see those clouds right there? Those are low-level clouds, okay? Now look over here. These are also the same clouds. So these clouds are basically the same. They're just low-level cumulus clouds, okay? Watch the orientation of this ridge. So there's a ridge of high pressure in the low levels right here. These clouds are moving in this kind of direction. So all these low-level clouds are moving in this direction. So in the low levels, the storm feels a push from the southeast to the northwest. And the upper levels, the storm is getting pushed this way. But because there's so little thunderstorm activity anchored to this low-level vortex, it's getting pushed this way. There's nothing for it to feel in the upper levels. It's like kind of having just your foot. Imagine if you had a creek that was flowing in two different directions, just somehow, just pretend it exists, and you only put your foot in the first half of the creek, so you only felt one direction tug on your leg. Well, then if you put your foot down to the bottom where the other direction's going, then you can start to understand there's two different forces pushing on this. So it is actually gaining latitude tonight, and it's pulling away from South America, which is checkpoint one, checking the box one for what the storm wants to do down the road. So we go further along, and what is the next thing we're looking for? Well, we're looking for an upper level low, looking right now over the Bahamas. We got this upper low kind of sinking in to the south of Florida. Again, this is an upper level trough. It's kind of like you would call it wave breaking, basically. That's going up under a high here that's moving in. So you got this little upper low that's going to start retrograding and moving down to the south. This is going to move up over the Western Caribbean out ahead of 98L. So that's one of the things we're trying to see, is how the upper level pattern works and looks going into the weekend. So we'll watch that as well. That's kind of the short-term things we're tracking in terms of real-time activity, how that little low looks, how much northerly latitude the storm gains in the short term, because those things matter a lot. Because we predicate all these forecasts off of an assumption. So like the assumption from the computer models is that this will eventually start moving more west than north. But when does that actually happen? When does this get enough thunderstorm activity to, instead of just move north the low-level flow, go, oh wait, and start turning more to the west? It's going to probably pull up, and then it'll turn west for a period, and then it'll start being steered by different patterns as it actually organizes. You can see most of the ensemble guidance has that same look, that wave to it. It goes north, then it flattens out and goes west, and then it moves back north again. So that's kind of what we're tracking. But how does that actually look? Does it get up here and then start turning north and get up in these islands? Does it turn it west sooner, and does it stay further south? Does that affect how much the steering fluence has on it? I don't know. I mean, the computer models don't seem to know either. So, that those are the kind of things you have to track in real time. You can't just go, oh, well, the Euro said this or the GFS said that. Like, okay, well, again, what that doesn't do me any good. What are we seeing in real time? So it looks like this storm's starting to get itself together, and you can see here again the environment out ahead is a lot better. The flow is lighter, there's less wind shear, and the water is just red hot. When the water's red hot, the oceanic heat content's off the charts. It's going to have all the time it needs to develop, or all the water it needs to develop. So the question is, how fast does it get going, and how soon does it turn? For the turning evolution, we have to watch this upper level trough coming into the eastern U.S. So on both these models, we'll compare GFS and Euro. We have this very powerful cyclone, which was Fiona on this model, moving into eastern Canada. So this is what's kind of kickstarting the thing that's going to try to pull 98L north. Yeah, there's a trough moving into the eastern U.S., but if this wasn't here, this trough wouldn't be that strong. It would just kind of ride through and ride up and do whatever. But because Fiona is so powerful, it's going to build a big ridge out ahead of it. It's going to build a ridge behind it. You're going to force a trough between them and down. So Fiona moves in on the GFS, and this trough swings in by early Monday. You've got this big long wave trough moving across the East Coast, and this is what breaks the ridge down over the eastern and central Atlantic and leaves it opening enough for 98L to begin to turn northward. Now, on the GFS, it sees this trough kind of moving out and leaving just enough of a pull for it to lazily move northward, but not a strong signal to race up under the trough. It just kind of starts to fill out and move away, and then the GFS just kind of rides the edge of this high and pushes it more west into the central eastern Gulf, whereas the European model, again, same scenario. Fiona's making landfall, kind of pushing all this stuff downward out behind it. The European sees this move in. Again, by early Monday, you got this sharp trough, but you got a little bit more of a different orientation. You've got a little bit stronger trough. You've got a little bit further back than the GFS had it. Not a ton, but if I go back to the same time, so we'll just do 12Z Monday and we'll do 12Z Monday. You can see there's some slight subtle differences. The Euro is a little bit further back and deep, where the GFS just slightly further ahead by 6 to 10 hours. But even that could be at least somewhat of a difference down the road. The European, though, sees the trough being stronger, and the high that's guiding this is off more towards the Bahamas, and the storm turns northward a lot sooner. This explains why our models tonight have this different solution. The European has gradually shifted further and further east. The European was up into like Tampa, Big Bend a couple days ago, even yesterday, and now the mean output for the Euro is into South Florida. That's also the evening operational European model run. Takes this up, moves it across very close to Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, across Cuba, and into South Florida. Now, there's some, good and bad news with that. I mean, bad news is it hits more people. The good news, though, is that it would not likely be as strong if it took this route because it'd have less time over water and it would have multiple land interactions before it got to South Florida. The bad news is this is going to hit, Miami and a lot of those really populated Southwest Florida cities and the Keys, and this could be a really bad storm for them, even if it's not, quote, as strong. But the GFS model or GFS ensemble output you see is a lot further to the west. All the GFS members cross this off to the west of Cuba. Now, this passage between Yucatan and Cuba, historically, a lot of really powerful hurricanes have crossed right through there. If they manage to thread that needle, you have storms like Carla and Camille and Michael, these really, really nasty historic landfalling hurricanes tend to do this sort of thing and then come up into the Gulf. And for whatever reason, they just stay over water and they get all huge. So that's what the GFS tells us tonight. The GFS is sticking to its more westward solution. Again, remember how the European had already drugged this up by Jamaica, but the GFS just sees it taking more of a westerly solution, going up near the passage between Cuba and the Yucatan, at this point a very powerful hurricane, and just moves it slower in general. Again, the trough begins to leave, and the GFS sees just like this kind of general weakness and light flow from the light push by the ridge off the Atlantic coast, and then this thing just kind of slowly works up into the Gulf. This gives a lot more time over water and brings a much stronger hurricane in and brings us right into the Big Bend of Florida. And the GFS, it is weakening as it approaches by Friday because it's kind of being sheared out by a trough or the front that's kind of hanging up around here. But you can see it kind of mixing in with a front right here. So it would be at least kind of weakening, I would imagine. But still, that's the other solution. And I think that right now it's really hard to say. I think given the nature of Fiona's really sharp intensity, that I would lean more to the Euro solution. I think that this trough coming in Monday and Tuesday is going to be pretty strong just because of how powerful Fiona is. And when you push that much energy up in here into the jet stream, it blows up everything else. You blow up these big ridges, and you've got to have a big trough response with that. And I think that if I had to pick a model, if I had to lean to a camp, it would be what the Euro is showing, this little bit faster recurve to the east and more into central South Florida. I think that we can only really confidently say tonight that Florida is under the most threat from this storm. I think that, if I was in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, I would, of course, be watching it. But I think that if you're looking for the most likely outcome, somewhere in central Florida, South Florida, even potentially the Big Bend and dragging across Northeast Florida, Northern Florida, that's also possible. But it's really too early because even in the short term, we've got different initialization points, and these models they've moved around still to a degree, and these models get into these camps for a while, but then eventually one comes back to the other is what typically what happens. Either the westward GFS solution will start migrating east, or the European model will start migrating back up into the north and the west, and you'll have your answer in the middle. So I would say, as soon as this thing starts forming up, we're gonna have Hurricane Hunter flights into it, and really with the models, the first Hurricane Hunter flight into a semi-coherent storm really makes a big difference. That's when your first suite of models drop it. You go, oh, okay, the models have been told here's the storm, here's what it looks like, here's the upper air pattern around it. They'll probably fly a P3 mission around the storm to get a better idea of the upper air pattern. And then you can go, okay, now what are the models telling us? Until then, they're just giving you possible solutions. They're not really telling you what really is probably likely to happen. So that's kind of the latest on all the weather stuff, guys. We'll take it as it comes. I'm probably not gonna be able to run a video tomorrow at any point. I'm gonna be gone literally all day, so I will be here Saturday morning, or probably the next time we talk. And by then, I would expect if we don't have a tropical storm yet, we'll probably at least have a potential tropical cyclone from the National Hurricane Center. So we'll have updates on the page, and then text updates on the page, and then tomorrow, Saturday morning, rather, we will have our next video. And by then, I think we'll know a pretty good idea of what this might shake out to be, and then we'll know a lot more, and we can go from there. So that's what I got for you guys tonight. Always thanks for watching, and have a good one.